So now we're going to have a panel that's going to talk about potentially the future of smart cities, why certain things can be implemented using blockchain, what the future city will look like, what do we need to standardize, so on and so forth. We'll bring that panel up shortly. In the interest of time, I'll let the panel folks introduce themselves, but I'll introduce them coming up here. First is Joe Bannon, VP of Strategy and Marketing from KARGlobal. Joe, come on up. Next is Mr. Sebastien Henot himself, one of the key players in the VID standard. Currently, he is the Senior Manager, Digital Business Integration at Accenture. Mr. Sebastien. Next, Sumita Jonak. She is a blockchain and innovation researcher at the University of Texas National Security Agency. Welcome. Next is Mr. Roger Berg. Roger, are you with us? There you are. VP North America R&D, DENSO International. And then last, Ryan Rugg, Global Industry Lead for R3. Welcome. Okay, panelists. So we're gonna attempt to talk about something that's very abstract, I think, and very nebulous. But what we'll try to do is go high level, go crazy and audacious as much as we can, and then we'll dive deeper and figure out what really makes sense in terms of standardization and how we can use those standards to implement and scale. But before we do that, why don't we go through and have some introductions? Maybe Joe, kick us off.
Sure, thanks, Mike. I'm Joe Bannon. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Marketing at KARGlobal. We just rebranded. You've seen us on the screen a couple of times already today as Car Auction Services. And that's our primary business is we provide marketplaces for the buyers and sellers of used cars at wholesale to transact.
Thank you, Joe. Mr. Sebastien.
Sebastien Henot, French. Sorry, excuse my French. So I'm working for Accenture. It's been less than a week. And prior to that, I was working at Renault Nissan Mitsubishi in the Silicon Valley lab, and I had the chance to be the chairman of the vehicle identity work group within MOBI.
Thank you. Sumita?
Sumita Jonak. I guess I could sum myself up as kind of a troublemaker wherever I am, usually in R&D.
Roger.
Hi, my name is Roger Berg. I work at DENSO. We used to be called a Tier 1 supplier, but most recently have now become what our CEO calls a mobility company. So not just a parts supplier, but actually undertaking the world of data, so to speak.
Thank you, Roger. I used to work quite a bit with DENSO in my time at Toyota, so I can certainly appreciate all of DENSO's services and suite of products. And lastly, Ryan.
Hi, my name is Ryan Rugg. I'm industry lead for R3. R3 started out as a consortium back in 2016. Actually, Chris Ballinger was one of the founding members when we first started out. And then in 2017, we realized there was no blockchain platform out there that fit the security and scalability issues of our members. So with our members, for our members, we built our own platform called Corda. And since then, it has grown to be one of the larger platforms in insurance and looking to kind of get more involved in mobility.
Yeah, I think we have we're lucky to have a very diverse and accomplished panel here with a wide-ranging expertise and experience. Makes me feel inadequate, but thank you very much, guys. Okay, so speaking about future smart cities, like I said, this is very abstract and nebulous. Everyone has different ideas of what it looks like, how blockchain can help, and whatnot. What I want to do is maybe at a very, very high level, talk to you guys and ask you guys what your views are of what a smart city in the future may look or feel like. It could be 5 years away, 10 years away, 50 years away, whatever it is. What does it look like to you? And keep in mind things like housing, mobility, commerce, public works, sustainability, community health, risk, and so on, right? So let's just throw it out there, be as wide-ranging as we can, be as crazy and audacious as we can, and then we'll try to reel it in. Okay, Joe, why don't you start? You look like a crazy guy. Why don't you start for us?
So when I think about smart cities, I think we've brought this up a couple of times already during this conference. They will be connected and trustworthy fleets of public and private transportation services that come together to provide mobility to the folks living in those smart cities. From CAR's perspective, we help fleets manage their vehicles. especially at end of life. So when I think about a smart city, I think about a fleet of vehicles that knows its value, that knows its condition in terms of maintenance, that can be trusted, so that you're getting into a vehicle that you can trust is well maintained and safe. And then at the end of that vehicle's life, it knows the value. It makes our job at KAR in defleeting that asset for its owner much easier and much more trusted.
That's not that crazy, Joe. It's very pragmatic, in fact. But you will play the pragmatist in this panel going forward. But thank you for that insight. So Sebastien, what do you think?
So I don't have the answer, but I looked a bit at the past and I asked myself what makes a city smart? And it's in the inhabitants. And if you look at the history of cities, the cities like boomed where we were concentrating people together, because you have this exponential effect of more people speaking together, the compound interest on knowledge they share and everything. And through the history of humanity, it was about concentrating people, building walls first, then sanitation system, because when you have many people, you have health issue, then the advent of the skyscrapers, for example, that help concentrate even more. So the next step is how do we alleviate the next problem that removes this friction? And what we need today is basically enhance transactions. We have like fast internet and everything, but transacting is always very complicated. So I believe that a smart city, to be very broad, the next level will be like seamless transactions. No need for like one ID here, one ID here, I don't know, many credit cards or whatever, picking to booths or going to buy your subway ticket at the machine. All this should be seamless, and that will be, for me, the next golden age for smart cities.
So minimal friction, easy to transverse mobility, moving of people, moving of freight. All these things will be happening autonomously without much intervention, interaction.
You know what, I don't even think, autonomous is, of course, a big promise, but I think a lot of value can be created before we go to fully autonomous systems.
Sure. But when I say autonomous, I don't mean autonomous driving so much, but so much as autonomous transactions.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, Sumita, what do you think?
Okay, so I'll take this from an environmental sustainability perspective. Being from the great state of Texas, we don't like to pay for parking. We expect it to be free. And, we have plenty of parking lots. So what I'd like to see is, with the advent of autonomous vehicles and, the taxis and so forth, it'd be great to repurpose that land. All those parking lots that are empty for large swaths of the day or at night, repurpose it. There's no reason to have all those parking lots. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think that would be a good feature as well. Roger?
So I'm going to agree a lot with what Sebastien said. I think cities are built around transactions, and if we can simplify, whether it's a knowledge transaction, a data transaction, a money transaction, I think that's where smart cities will become more, resilient. And in the sense that if I look at most things that are resilient in the world, they're not, centrally controlled things. Nature is most resilient thing we can think of, and it's very spread out in terms of where the knowledge is and where the power is and where there's no center to that. And that's what I think smart cities of the future will evolve into, something less centralized and more distributed, which is one of the reasons why I'm at this conference.
Yeah. Speaking of distributed, maybe Ryan is a good place to follow up on that.
So going last is always fun, So it's like everything I wanted to say, everyone else took. But no, I agree with everyone. Initially what we're seeing is, streamlining of city operations and kind of gaining efficiencies there. But what's really important to me, and agreeing with Sumita, is the social impact and sustainability. And in my current role, spearheading all the industries, we're starting to see them converge. So yeah. It's not just about, the city operations. It's about, the water we drink, the food we eat, the streets we walk on, the roads that we drive on, really kind of becoming, in a way, self-sustaining, which is actually really interesting to me, making less of a carbon footprint and kind of hopefully changing the future of the way that we do commerce.
Okay, so the way I look at this is, I think all of your answers is that there's an underlying commonality here, right? That underlying commonality is data. right? With the appropriate set of data, the volumes of data, we can accomplish the fleet pie in the sky scenario that you speak of, Joe. Likewise with you in terms of mobility transactions. Some parts of sustainability, I think, can be solved with data. And then Roger, you concur with the transactions, and then of course you, Ryan, right? So in terms of that, if we can democratize, decentralize data, right? I see ourselves as kind of the data freedom fighters of the future, right? If we can get to that point where we can liberate the data, liberate these volumes of data from these silos, then the app developers and different companies can go and build on those sets of data to have a better city, better life, better future, right? So Joe, or just open it up to everyone. So how do we get here to there, right? What steps do we have to put in place to be where we are today and the future that we all want to see going forward?
I think we've heard some of it in some of the last presentations we just saw, the collaboration that groups like MOBI bring together, GM and Ford working together, not being sharks trying to fight over the same pie, but being more collaborative. Data's the new oil, but unless we are freer with sharing it, and I think blockchain can help do that in a more secure way, I think that's a start.
I think talking about where we currently are, like where's the current state of blockchain and what we're doing. And I can speak from, from when I wore the insurance hat. The first live app we had was InsureWave, which was XL Catlin, MS Amlin, and Maersk. Maersk was the client. And basically Maersk went out there and said, I have multiple insurance policies on the ships, on the cargo, on the boxes that hold the cargo, on the trucks that bring the cargo. There's so much data out there. And now I have better ability to track my ships through GPS and IoT that I want, what you guys are moving towards,
yep.
usage-based insurance. But first you have to get the policy on there. And what was the key part of that is they used the Accord standards. So tying it all back to actually having a commonality of standards that the whole industry agreed on is what I think helped accelerate them.
Sure.
With being able to get live in 18 months, which from my seat is record time for being able to build a POC to get live in blockchain. But now it's really taking this initial, just sharing the data real time to be able to then extrapolate to really usage-based insurance, kind of like the next. So data efficiencies first, and then new product lines in the future.
Sure. So if we carry that on, the whole usage-based insurance conversation a bit, and Sumita, maybe we can get some comments from you on that side. We talked briefly on this conference about usage-based insurance, and there's some out there that are doing some iterations of this, right? So Allstate's doing DriveWise, which essentially looks at your speed, your braking, your acceleration, and your time of day. Metromile is doing it per mile, and maybe a couple of other characteristics. Tesla has jumped into this foray of doing usage-based insurance, so to speak, because they have a vast treasure trove of data that they can put a real accurate risk score on every one of their drivers, right? The car phones home constantly real time. So from your perspective, usage-based insurance, how real is it going forward for other insurers to provide that? And what's the stumbling or what's the barrier for entry for these insurance providers? Okay,
so I'll tackle that two ways. Right now, we're using apps, right? So you've got Root, that's a great provider of using like the sensors that are in your phone and getting that data from there. TrueMotion is another one, but it's limited, right? So with Tesla and with the sensors that once they become exposed, that data stream is direct from the OEM, is direct from the vehicle itself, much more robust, much more powerful than the phone sensors. So that's going to be preferred. The second part of that question, I would say, is if the carriers don't prepare for that, you're going to have the OEMs offering their own a la carte insurance like Tesla is. Volvo's doing it by virtue of Liberty Mutual, but there's no reason why the OEMs can't do it directly. So it's an existential threat to carriers if they don't provide it, so they're going to have to. So Roger, from your perspective, with all you provide a lot of the sensors that goes into these vehicles. What's your vision going forward for the data coming out of these sensors and who owns it and so on?
So the data from a cell phone or the data from a car, it's all dirty as hell.
Yep.
And you can't really do anything with it. Data is really no good in and of itself. Kind of like, the analogy was made towards data's the new oil, but
Yeah.
oil is no good unless you put it in a motor or an engine or a turbine or
Refine it.
something to,
Sure.
to generate some value. And I think the same way about data. And I think that the people who will be able to use data to their financial advantage will be able to, number one, clean it up, number two, identify or have trust in the data source or sources, and number three, provide value. It's not just collection of data and putting it all together in one spot. It has to be trusted, it has to be normalized, and it has to be of value.
Yeah.
So do you think the standards, though, are helping to do that, to cleanse the dirty data through the normalization process?
No, I don't.
Maybe that's what we can help with.
Yeah, all the data can be in one format, but if it's still from an untrusted source, or it's still of limited value. I wouldn't say no value, but it's of limited value.
Well, so I think we've heard about a couple talks about this, right? This problem. I think Bruce talked about it from the ocean side. We have a couple other talks. I think the annotation and the massaging is super, super important, right? Without this annotation and massaging data, like you said, it's not the oil. It's just the dirtiness stuff that comes from the ground.
Sludge or
Yeah,
whatever
True.
crude oil is.
True.
I don't know what you call it.
So Sebastian, your thoughts?
So data, two things. First thing with data, it's like food. You have to trust basically the origin and the quality of it. And then you have to find a way to transact if you buy it. And for those three things, blockchain is awesome. This is this is a techno brick that's needed. I've been working on data in my previous job, and basically you have kind of three different business models. Either it's like gold extraction. You lease the land, so you lease the source that gonna originate data, and you don't care what they're gonna do with data. That's the first one. The second one is you extract the data, but it's raw data. And the third one is you refine it. And after that, either you buy the raw data, you put yourself where you want in this ecosystem, but that's basically the three options we have today. And I believe that at each stage, each transformation stage, we need those standards to make sure that the data is extracted in a way that anybody can now figure out the origin and the quality. The data needs to be refined by identify actors in a way that's standard, so when it comes like as a refined product on the market, people can build services on it. It's pretty much like gold.
Yeah. So I agree. So I think in some of our working groups, what we talked about, and from my perspective, if I break down life and data, life essentially is just about quantization and fidelity. If you think about it, that's all life is. Everything around you is data, right? Sort of like if you pretend you live in a simulation, and we can have a different conversation about that, but everything around you is data. If you are successful in pulling this data, gleaning a certain fidelity or a certain signal from this data that no one else is able to see, then you have an advantage to your end game, whatever your end game is, right? From our perspective, in terms of standardization, whatever industry, whatever field we want to tackle, whether it's securities or VID or whatever else, it's our job in that panel to break down to levels of buckets, levels of quantization that works for the majority of the population, right? So that way we can have wide-scale implementation and scalability. And then from that point, then we can refine the data as it comes in, to Roger's point, to Ryan's point, to Sebastian's point. So what other things do we think that we can do and accomplish in terms of a future smart city from a MOBI's community's perspective to help advance and promote going forward?
Well, I'll go first. I think driving more collaboration between the public and private. This is a great group we've got here, but except for the city of Los Angeles coming in to speak later, I don't see any other public.
Well, Kevin's here from Bermuda.
Bermuda, yay Bermuda. Right on. So I think driving more public and private collaboration is one thing.
Okay.
I would say identity for me is the key, is the entry point. So we need to build those standards. I mean, if we started to do that at MOBI, but it needs to go from the vehicle to anything at one moment. Anything should have kind of a standardized identity.
Sure, yeah.
And I'll add to what Joe said. It's collaboration, but it's not just talk, it's actually do.
Yes.
So that's like, when we started out as a consortium and we had the community, we started as a banking consortium, they talked a lot about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it, but then when they actually tried to put in practice and build POCs and MVPs, like early days, they wanted to boil the ocean. They wanted to solve like every issue out there in banking. And it's like, let's just get one component live, prove the ROI, and then it really helps all of you out there really drive budgets and be able to get resources to kind of continue on. So drive collaboration in the community, but also act on it. Build out POCs, and it's okay to fail. That's one thing that I think everyone should know. Like, we did 250 POCs. Of that, maybe 5% went to production. So,
which is a good hit rate still. It's not, it's not a bad hit rate.
It's not what my boss tells me.
exactly.
Tell your boss he's too old school and he needs to think
he is way old school.
Yeah, you need to liberate him, liberate his mind. Roger.
I can bring him to next conference.
Yeah, absolutely. You should bring him to the next conference. Yeah. So anyone else with specific thoughts on moving forward here, what we can do that help advance?
Just one point about POCs is that this common metric of like having 5% of success, I think you learn more on the 95% of failures than on the 5% of successes.
Sure, that's absolutely true.
So in my previous job, the manager was in charge, like, force the HQ to accept a failure KPI.
Yeah.
And it was really a cultural shock at the HQ.
Yeah. So to be completely honest with everyone, from my perspective, I'm starting to hate that acronym POC, right? Because it's becoming to the point where it's almost meaningless. You hear it all the time, POC, 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 and rarely does that lead to anywhere. So this whole VID initiative, I told early on that I hate this acronym POC. What I want to call it is a pilot. A pilot assumes and makes certain assumptions that, look, we're going to go do this. Failure is not an option. We will do it. And we will do it in the right amount of time. A POC, right now, I think that the connotation is, okay, we'll try it out. We'll test out the waters, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. No, like, that's not an option. That ecosystem is coming, like I said. You can't fight it, so why not do it? And that's my perspective. But
sometimes I call it a proof of value as opposed to a proof of concept.
We heard that from Alan.
Right.
You got to prove the value.
Right, because from a business standpoint, you can do all these science experiments you want. If there's no value to them, it's no value to your business.
Sure.
No value to your ecosystem, no value to the economy that you're trying to build. So I think more times than not, it's really a proof of value, because we're doing stuff that hasn't been done before.
Yep.
And so when you try to explain it to somebody, you can't really, and you ask some question about, do you think this is really valuable to you? And they kind of go, I don't know. But if you showed it to them, then they understand the value.
so relative to
hands-on kind of.
I agree with that too. So I think going forward, essentially from my perspective, and I could be wrong on this because my foray into blockchain has been very short, right? I joined MOBI about 6-7 months ago. Prior to that, not much with blockchain before. But from my perspective, I think if we go out there and we execute and architect correctly, what blockchain buys for smart city in the future is what I call TECS text, right? Trust, efficiency, cost, and security. Now, some of you may argue with that, and you are perfectly right to do that. But I think from my perspective, coming from someone completely outside the industry, I think if we are smart about it and we actually go build things and do things that work, blockchain can get us those gains in those 4 areas. Agree?
I definitely agree. First, as you said, efficiency. I think that's the first kind of piece that I'm seeing in the puzzle. Like, they build these POVs, they build these pilots, MVPs, whatever you want to call it. Show the ROI. You have a steering committee that's in it. Typically, it's really to cut down the fat initially, kind of like the lower your expense ratio, and then it's the new product line. So it all kind of ties in, but the first phase that we're seeing is really getting the data on there, reaching consensus on what the data is, if it's contracts or if it's, there's different things about sensors that we argue internally about, but you getting the data on there first, agreeing on it, and then gaining that efficiency, and then building from there.
Yep.
I'll add something to that. So I had an opportunity to talk with our transportation and mobility officer in the city of San Antonio, and I asked him quite provocatively, like, hey, what are we doing to get ourselves off the fuel tax as a way of, fixing city infrastructure? Let's wean ourselves off of it, because that's not going to be sustainable in the future as EVs come on board, electric vehicles. And Tram very eloquently said, well, yeah, EVs weigh a hell of a lot more than regular conventional vehicles, yet they are not paying for that infrastructure that they're using. So a pay-per-use tax is what, I just asked this person about, and he kind of balked at me. He's like, dude, that's not going to happen. The citizens are not going to vote for that. Totally get it. They're not going to vote for it. And you don't want to marginalize, the populations that cannot afford EVs because they're still kind of a rich man's vehicle nowadays. Even with, they're just not cost affordable for the most part for the mass market. So the question then is, okay, well, how do you creatively solve for that pay-per-use problem? And that's where, the city of San Antonio is looking to try to figure it out. I'd love to hear, what LA is doing, so hopefully we'll figure that out at CoMotion.
Yeah, true. I think we have some certain pathways and roadmaps into getting to that front as well. I think blockchain especially can solve some of that through micropayments, a certain amount of trust and identity. I think we can solve some of those problems, but for sure. But it takes a lot of building, it takes a lot of architecture, it takes a lot of vision, and that's something we hope that this whole room, I think, can provide going forward.
I like your text. I would replace the E. For me, it's cost and security is part of efficiency by empowerment. When you look at Uber, for example, the reason they've been able to build this is because they had access to the phone sensors, the GPS, and they had access to payment APIs. And those things, they have been opened pretty recently. So one of the goals of the standard is to allow basically this empowerment. And it's not about empowering like whatever people, it's about empowering the future tech geniuses that are going to build the applications of the future. And based on, what I know is the vehicle identity, I've been really happy to speak with Filament and heard that they realized a POC in 3 weeks, which is, according to Tesla standards, slow, but according to my standards, pretty fast.
It's a pilot. It's not a POC. It's a pilot.
Pilot. Edict for everyone going forward. No more POCs. Screw POC. We're all about pilots. Okay, so last comments or last thoughts, opinions to share before we maybe open them for questions.
One that I heard that really resonated with me was the GM talk about focusing on safety. A vision that I could see for a smart city would be no pedestrians run over by cars, yeah. Right? Much safer, much greener. And I think that's something that MOBI can focus on, and everybody's going to rally around, right? Nobody's going to argue with safety.
Yeah. Last thoughts, Roger?
I used to talk to OEMs 20 years ago that said we can't sell safety, and now I tell them, have you seen your advertising? Because that's what you're selling.
Yep.
You're not selling four wheels with an engine anymore. You're selling a safer mode of transportation. So I agree with Joe.
So one quick anecdotal story. I was in the Waymo van recently, and what people don't realize is that LiDAR is also very, the capabilities is limited. We got behind a truck that was taller than the van, and the LiDAR could not see in front of it because it was blocked by that truck, and so it couldn't make a decision, right? So what people don't realize is that autonomy, we're probably a bit away. But one potential outcome to that experience, that scenario that I had, is potentially maybe we need LiDAR in all the light posts, in all the phone posts, in all the infrastructure on the road. And not just that, maybe that data from that LiDAR needs to live somewhere, and it needs to be somewhat tied to blockchain so that data transaction can take place, right? So that's one potential outcome. I don't know, but I think that's something that's interesting.
That's the biggest thing about shared sensors is, do you trust the data you're getting?
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly.
So safety is an interesting point, because when you look at the car industry, today they're promoting safety, but safety became kind of a USP, unique selling point. Brands like Renault, Volvo, and today the customer considers that it's a standard.
Right.
You have to be safe. It's like selling you water, saying it's fine, it's pure.
Yeah.
Trust it. Yes, of course. I just don't buy it for that.
Yeah.
And building standards is exactly that. It's gonna move things from what today we consider as kind of a unique selling point, something cool to have, to something that's just basic and we need to have it.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're out of the market.
Yeah.
I want to add a little bit from the usage-based insurance side to this. So right now, carriers are required to do like a history check on your driving ability. So, an unsafe driver is going to be priced for a higher risk. It would be great to see in the future when that data is available and you don't have to pay like the aggregators for it, like LexisNexis, when that data is available from the user. So, I could say, hey, Sebastien, you want to switch carriers. Let me go check on your driving history and make sure you're, not a crazy French driver. And, I could price your risk accordingly. But that's at you deciding to share that information with me. And if you choose not to, then you're going to be priced at a higher point because you value whatever it is or you're a risky driver. The reason why I bring this up is because what I really love about blockchain is it's kind of like the great equalizer. It's disintermediating these mega data aggregators. Lexus is one, that's a big 800-pound gorilla. Verisk is another one. We've talked, a lot of the speakers here actually alluded to taking out Carfax with some of the information that they're aggregating and bringing together and exposing to the public. I'd love to see dealerships taken away. Those are, huge swaths of land, and they're just so painful. Just that experience is just so frustrating. So it'd be great to see, hey, if you want to sell a used vehicle or if you want to sell a direct, like the Tesla model, just sell it directly. You know the whole history of the vehicle because the vehicle is self-advertising or the owner of the vehicle is self-advertising. I see people smiling about getting rid of dealerships, so this is great.
So yeah, we got to be careful there because dealerships, I think, are heavily lobbied. They are one of the most powerful.
They are.
Yeah, that's, yeah. Anyways.
And I would say though, but insurers are taking back their data. Like if I think of a consortium here in the US called Riskstream, the first two applications that they just did a penetration test and soak test next month are first notice of loss and proof of insurance. So they're actually getting the policy on there and starting the whole claims, and all the insurers that are involved in that, which goes live in Q1, will actually own that data. So they're actually taking the rights back instead of giving it to third parties and then paying for it at some other time. So you're starting to see that transition. And if you think about it, they're small use cases, but it's kind of, as I said, like the small piece to actually show the ROI that can get the bigger ecosystem involved.
So, I mean, none of you are aware, but internally we do have MOBI. We do have developing capabilities. We have a small team of developers. We are developing a mobility that's powered by blockchain, and part of that architecture is the data. You've heard a lot about this, about all the other players wanting to turn your data back to the user's ownership. But we architect it to the way where the data does belong to the user, and if the user wants to monetize that data, they can sell it, but they have to explicitly opt in to sell that data. So I think that's coming. I hope it's coming sooner than later, but I think that future is going to be here at some point.
Just, I want to add one point about dealerships. I was like you, I never liked dealerships before, and since I switched company, I don't have a company car anymore, so I had to buy a car. So I went to this German manufacturer from Munich. They have fancy cars, and it was a good experience in the end.
Yeah.
It's getting better.
It's getting good. Yeah, it was good. I mean, they explained the range, they help us find a car and everything. And we're thinking, like, it's kind of the same that's going to happen with, like, the bus drivers. Today, the bus driver is driving the bus. That's where it creates value. If the bus is self-driving, why don't we put this guy and helping, like, making sure that the kids are not fooling around or whatever in the bus? So it's not about erasing them from the map. It's about telling them to do something else. And I believe that dealerships or whatever, Tesla points of sales, the future is not selling you a car or doing all this administrative work, because this should be streamlined. That's part of the standards and smart city, but to be more of an advisory, helping you, I don't know, configuring your car, whatever. And that's what they did, and it was really a good experience.
Yeah, so originally I was hoping this whole panel, we have this psychedelic, views of the future and crazy, like we're tripping out and stuff, but you guys are all too just pragmatic and just too real life.
We're talking about taking out major corporations. What? I mean, that's like a coup.